Are you tired of being sheep? Well, so is he. Get a friend, get informed, and get involved. It's We're Not Cattle Radio.
Good evening and welcome to We Are Not Cattle Radio. Back at its normally scheduled time, 9 o'clock Tuesday and Thursday, your 1 hour of my world of reality. So thank you so much for joining us. As usual, I am your host, Jake Counts, navigating you through this crazy world that we live in. And it has gotten even crazier since Sunday, if you can even believe it. Now, Sunday I spent the entire podcast talking about morality here in America, what morality is by definition, how we've strayed from that, how it brings on all kinds of challenges and issues when it comes to freedom in general. And so now we're going to talk about the grand chessboard or the big scheme of things. And joining me here a little bit later on in the broadcast will be Josh Wiley of the Journalistic Revolution. And we're going to get into the situation in the Ukraine. And the best way to really understand what's going on in the Ukraine is to get an idea or to dive into history. How dare we? So what I've done is I've put a compilation together of some important dates and important transitions that took place during the formation of Yugoslavia through the illegitimacy of the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union fell apart, how all of this stuff came together, and we have this specific region called Crimea. And now, for those of you that read a lot of history books, I have, once again, I'm not saying that I am a historical scholar by any sense of the imagination, but I've taken a newfound love of history in my latter years, and I'm slowly getting back into, I have not delved into Soviet history, but I do remember a lot of this from the history course I took in college and the history courses that I've taken throughout high school and stuff. So some of this stuff may sound familiar. The area known as Crimea should sound familiar to you. They had these things called the Crimean Wars, which the Crimean War, the very first one, took place in 1853, and it was fought between the Russian Empire with the alliance of the French, the British, the Ottoman Empire. Basically, it was a big power struggle to find out who was going to take this region when the Ottoman Empire croaks. So, as this all kind of festered, and the reason that Crimea is such an important, integral part of what is now modern-day Ukraine, I think I said Yugoslavia earlier, I don't know why I said that, what is modern-day Ukraine, is that it is a port city. So, and unfortunately for the current Russian government, it is the port city for one of their naval bases. So that's why it's in the Russian interest to protect this port in Crimea, and it is in the Ukrainian interest to get it back because of issues that we'll get into here in a little bit. So continuing on with the history of this little small region that's in dispute currently, occupied with Russian troops and so on and so forth, and I really haven't even watched any mainstream media coverage of this because in all reality, who cares? They're just going to sell you a bunch of lies anyway, try to get you into war, and try to also. I actually do have a BBC article that will once Josh gets on, I'll read it to him, and he'll be able to point out the spin that they're trying to put on this whole matter in general. So, moving back to the history, the war devastated much of the economy of Crimea. And their infrastructure. And so what happened is you had the Tatars were basically removed from this area. They've been moved in and out a couple of different times, whether it was through Stalin when he forced the mass exodus, and I'll get into that here in a little bit, but this was through the Ottoman Empire, and they religiously go through famine, disease, all kinds of things happen. But what happened at the end of this entire war, the Crimean War, and it lasted a couple of years, so about 1856, the Russian government actually went back to resettle because it's a very fertile farmland. So once again, going back into the times where we actually used to care about farmland, crops, cultivation, those types of things before we had big agri to help us out. These were very important issues to attend to, especially if you are a large and prosperous fledgling country like what was happening out of Russia through the dying of the Ottoman Empire. So moving forward, where it really starts to get interesting is the Civil War in Russia about 1917. So Crimea was the last place for the so-called White Russians, the anti-Bolsheviks, where they made their stand against the Red Russian Army, and they lost, and it was in 1920. So this area has changed hand many, many times over, and I'll put all these links and some of these notes in, but it's just absolutely astounding. It's like 15 different times that it changes hands between the dates of 1917 and 1945. And 1945 is when they start to really solidify that area. So moving on, the things to really highlight here, in 1932, much like I said before, back in the 1800s, Crimea experienced two severe famines. One's the famine of 1921, and the second one, the famine of 1932. And a large Slavic population, this is where it gets interesting, the large Slavic population occurs in 1930 as a result of the Soviet foreign policy to basically deploy all of the people that were currently living there and that were ousted by Stalin and his regime and his takeover. Now, some interesting fun facts about the region currently, but not as current as I would like for it to be. The notes that I have here that currently the Crimean culture is made up of 1.6 million Russians and 260,000 Ukrainians, and that was back in the 1990s. So the numbers have fluctuated just a little bit, but understand it's a very strong Russian population and almost a 50-50 split. That's a little bit more than 50-50 back in the 80s, and I couldn't find numbers because I was, let's just face it, I was running out of time putting all this stuff together for tonight's show. But keep all this stuff in mind when we're going down this path of why the Ukraine? Why is this so important? Well, there's a couple of different reasons. Number one, for those of you that don't study geopolitics, Russia is a huge exporter of natural gas. Now, where does the natural gas go and where does it flow through? That's the other question. And how does it get to these EU-sanctioned nations? So there's two real big power structures utilizing their leverage to try to get into the Ukraine and grab the Ukraine because of the significance of these gas pipelines. And magically enough, these gas pipelines run right through this region that we're talking about, and that's why it's so valuable for any nation or collection of nations like the EU or even I'm surprised America hasn't got involved in this, but it's kind of in Russia's backyard, so I would understand why they're staying out of it, so to speak, a little bit. Sending John Kerry, the famous wax figure of the United States politics, over there to negotiate whatever he's going to negotiate. Maybe we're going to go attack Syria again. I don't know. I mean, the way that this operation operates now in the United States with our foreign policy, we could be in conflict with Antarctica tomorrow. Who knows? Just off the charts craziness. So anyway, the two power structures are vying for this portion of land, mainly because of the factions that are there. You obviously have a strong Soviet factions, and they just want some money. Let's face it. It's all about money. And lately, if you haven't noticed, moving forward into the 21st century and into the 22nd century, it will be all about energy. Who has the energy and how can I get it, and who has got it the cheapest. So that's where the real battle lies, is in the balance sheet. The balance sheet is the ultimate arbiter of why these wars go on. It is one of the reasons that we went over to Syria. It's one of the reasons that we have been in Afghanistan. The American population has no idea what is going on here in the United States, much less what goes on abroad. So I mean, you can go fight wars over whatever. If you want to fight a war over lithium, even though, everybody that's ever invaded Afghanistan has never won or never done anything, you can go ahead and do that because, once again, Alan Dulles said it, the American people do not read. So there we go. Now, I do want to go to this piece by Paul Joseph Watson, and I do appreciate his research, and I do appreciate his take on a lot of geopolitical things because he comes from the UK, so he gets a different spin than we do here in America. That being said, always double check the facts, and the majority of what he says here is pretty spot on. He covers what I talked about briefly. So let's go to this clip. It's about 6 minutes long, and this should give us enough time to get Josh on, and then we can have our real conversation about, is this a fascist regime in the Ukraine, or is that a political ploy? Is Putin really posturing for the United States to pull something, or is he just protecting his ports? And what's going to happen with the EU? We all know the EU is struggling. The EU is going bankrupt. If you study politics, if you study geopolitics, if you study finance whatsoever, you understand that the EU, what they've done in Greece, Italy, Spain, all of these other nation states, if you were Ukraine and you're sitting there watching Greece get imploded, watching Spain get imploded, and watching Italy go down the tubes, you would probably say, hell no also. So that's where we're at. And let's go to this clip, and then hopefully we'll pick Josh up on the backside to start our conversation. If you guys want to join in the conversation, feel free to log into the chat window via Blog Talk Radio. Also, feel free to call into the show, 602-753-1916. Always up for a good dialogue with all of our fans and all of the people that listen to the podcast on the regular. And once again, for the people that tune in to listen to me live, stammer around in this reality that we live in, thank you so much. Once again, share the podcast with people you know, people you like, and people you think that might be interested in having a different conversation rather than LeBron James scoring 61 points last night. So, well, there's my sports plug, everybody. There you go. LeBron James scored 61 points for whoever cares. And they wouldn't let him wear this mask that looked like something literally out of the Stanley Kubrick movie, Eyes Wide Shut. But that's neither here nor there. That is for the conspiracy show, so we will not go there today. Today we are talking about the Ukraine and Russia and why all this stuff is going down and why you should actually care, America. You should care about geopolitics, even though the magic box tells you not to. Here's the clip.
The untold secret behind the Russia-Ukraine conflict is that this is part of a broader energy war. Europe and NATO are desperate to end their dependence on natural gas from Russia, while Russia is desperate to maintain its near-monopoly on natural gas in Eastern Europe via the largely state-owned Gazprom. Russia supplies 30% of Europe's natural gas, and 66% of that travels via pipelines which run through Ukraine. Russia also supplies 35% of Europe's oil. The fact that Ukraine's former government, led by President Yanukovych, had agreed a trade deal to economically integrate with Russia instead of the EU, which it rejected, would have deepened the EU and NATO's energy dependence on Russia, which is one of the primary reasons why the West contrived this revolt, and now we've had that confirmed via released documents proving that US aid, which is a front for the State Department, the National Endowment for Democracy, and other NGOs funded the very protest groups that began the occupation of Kiev back in November. Over the past 2 years, energy giants such as Chevron, Exxon, and Royal Dutch Shell had started exploration for new natural gas fields in western Ukraine, as well as other Eastern European countries. And they discovered huge new natural gas fields in western Ukraine and Poland. But they couldn't get the go-ahead to finalize these deals because Putin was leaning on Yanukovych via this trade deal. Now post-coup, post-overthrow, those barriers are gone and the deals are ready to be signed with the new pro-EU post-coup Ukrainian government. This threatens Gazprom's energy monopoly in the region, which was already under stress from the development of 5 trans-Mediterranean pipelines from Libya, Algeria and Morocco to southern Europe. Obviously, if new natural gas sources are established in western Ukraine by the likes of Chevron, Exxon and Royal Dutch Shell, with a pro-EU government in power, that dramatically reduces Europe's dependence, their reliance on natural gas coming from Russia. Which is why Moscow is now attempting to commence a counter-revolution, beginning with its occupation of Crimea. The occupation of Crimea is about setting the precedent for eastern Ukraine and ensuring Russian control, because 3 of the 4 major gas pipelines run through eastern Ukraine from Russia. Domestically speaking, Putin also needs stable and elevated hydrocarbon prices to fund the state budget and pay for all the new weapons Moscow is acquiring. If he loses control over that, Russia becomes far more vulnerable to NATO encirclement in a geopolitical context. So, Moscow is already following through on this. Reuters reported today, Putin says Gazprom to scrap gas price discount for Ukraine. The previous discount enjoyed by Yanukovych's administration is coming to an end because the new post-coup government is not paying its bills on time to Gazprom. And of course, yesterday it was reported that Gazprom threatened to disrupt gas supplies to Europe as a result of the political turmoil in Ukraine. Talk of sanctions and reprisals by both Barack Obama, John Kerry, and top Russian officials are likely hot air because at least in the short term, Europe is dependent on Russia and Russia is dependent on exporting natural gas to Europe. So you're probably not going to see any significant or crippling sanctions. As Kerry said, it looks like it's mostly hot air. But what you are likely to see is a de facto partition, a balkanization of East and West Ukraine, because neither army is strong enough to outmaneuver the other. And then the spat will likely return to the question, to the political battle of who controls the puppet government in Kiev, the West or Russia, with the poor Ukrainian people stuck in the middle of this geopolitical tug of war. So to summarize, at around the same time or shortly before this deal was signed between Ukraine and Russia, rejecting the EU, energy giants had discovered large natural gas fields in western Ukraine and were waiting to sign the deal to exploit those gas fields, which would have reduced and eventually eliminated Europe's energy dependence on Russia. Russia, of course, did not want to accept this. They want Gazprom to maintain the neo-monopoly, because if NATO and the EU become energy independent from Russia, it will be a lot easier to follow through on NATO's agenda of encircling Russia with military bases. So that's the true untold story behind the Ukraine-Russian conflict. It's an energy war based around gas pipelines.
So that's what we should be watching, everybody. And if whether it's oil, whether it's natural gas, whether it's lithium, this is what it's about. It's about controlling the energy supply of the planet. And whether it is an aristocratic regime like they have in some Asian nations, or if it's just a I don't know what to call the American elitist class, but let's just call them the upper echelon, if you will. Whether it's those guys, whether it's the Russians who have a lot of ties to mafia-style government and also KGB ties with Vladimir Putin. So it's all about the energy supply. That's why energy independence is so crucial. And that's why I think that it's very important for the American people themselves, the people that understand where all this could go. I'm not saying that this doesn't look like World War III to me. This looks a lot like just saber rattling. Saber rattling, posturing, and that was one of my questions that I posed. Is this Putin just posturing, or is this really something that we need to look into? So now that being said, I'm actually going to get our friend Josh on the line here from the Journalistic Revolution. So I'm going to go ahead and pull him up. And you guys, as usual, if I'm running a podcast with somebody else, I'm going to be running video and still trying to work the kinks out of this video stuff. But hey, it's another medium, and as usual, Josh does not disappoint with the cardigan. So thanks to you so much, Josh Wiley, for coming on with us tonight. And I don't know how much you've been listening. You got your Go USA America Cup, so we're ready to rock and roll, man. So thanks for coming on.
I'm here for the freedom.
So let me just set the stage, because I know you were doing some stuff and tying some things up before you came on tonight. Basically, I went over a brief history of Crimea and why this area in particular is so important for Russian interest and just the overall diversity of the area. It's a mixture of Slavic and Russian, and the challenges that they've faced with the Crimean War, how that was just a big melting pot for a whole bunch of different empires. As the Ottoman Empire was on its way out, everybody was, having a big grab bag for power in the peninsula. And then talking about the famines and all the other desolation they've had here, and when Stalin kicked them all out after the Red Russians won and the White Russians, basically were defeated, and then Stalin kicked out all the Tartars and said, you guys are not allowed, and then they had the influx of the Slavs. So now you're pretty much all caught up, and I just actually played an InfoWars clip that Paul Joseph Watson did that was a really good boil down of the money that's involved here with the gas pipeline going through the Ukraine. And what this is really all about, and as I was saying before you even came on, understand that the majority of the things that we fight over and squabble over now are not, color your skin, anything like that. It's all about energy. It's all about cheap energy, and it's all about who controls it, because who controls the energy has basically got the leverage that you need. So with all that being said, you got the floor, man. What are your thoughts on this? And then just geopolitically, and then I want to get into, is this really a fascistic group coming in, or is this a strongly nationalistic group that is being slandered upon every media outlet? And I've got a BBC article that you're going to like because it is pure slander. But go ahead. So you got the floor.
Well, your historical analysis of the Crimean region was a little bit deeper than I am familiar with. So thank you for the brief primer.
Okay.
I was certainly familiar with some of the more recent stuff, and the influence that Stalin had on the area, comes to mind. But I didn't even think of the greater implications and its involvement with the Ottoman Empire. As far as the Ukrainian situation as a whole goes, this is something that we've been talking about pretty frequently on the Journalistic Revolution. And to your second point about the nature of these Ukrainian supposed protesters, I am staunchly of the opinion, at least at this point in time, that these are very legitimate fascists being backed by the State Department.
Well, I would agree with you, and the reason that I would agree with you to the extent, and I have an article that will contradict all the stuff that we're going to say, but just look at follow the money. Obviously, you had the NGOs that were basically injected in there about a month ago before all this stuff went to task. You had George Soros funded groups that were literally using the same paper cutout. Thank you, Seabell Edmonds, for breaking that, and Josh and I picked that up. That were literally using the exact same flyer that they used in Egypt to stir up that rebellion. So once again, it's the West going and picking fights, and now not really picking fights, but stirring up rebellion to create turmoil, to get people that are EU friendly in there, so that they can bring about this grand chessboard that they want to consolidate all these areas into regions, and then consolidate the regions into subgroups, and then consolidate it into one world government, and everything's going to be peaches, and and fine and dandy. But I would agree
Yeah.
with your analysis there, just given the fact that the NGOs were over there, and knowing what the NGOs are there to do. The NGOs are not there to make national freedoms or nationalism part of their playbook. They're there for destabilization and EU takeover. That is the game plan.
Of course. Yeah, this has Soros written all over it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But even more than that, I don't know if you've played this clip on your show for your listeners ever, but we kind of covered it on Sunday night's Journalistic Revolution program, where of course the famous leaked audio clip that was put out by Yanukovych's essentially NSA equivalent of Victoria Nuland saying "fuck the EU," and of course the profanity is what makes the headlines, but the context of the tape is talking about which of these two neo-Nazi groups America would find more preferable to be in a leadership position, and it's very clear. Over at globalresearch.com or .ca, excuse me, Professor Michelle Chossudovsky has a superb article on exactly who these two fascist groups are, Svoboda and the Fatherland Party, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
Both of whom have used not just Nazi rhetoric, or not just fascist rhetoric, excuse me, but neo-Nazi rhetoric, specifically targeting obviously various religious beliefs and ethnic creeds, utilizing the same kind of symbols and hand gestures. So I would say that there is some ideational continuity between Nazis and these two Ukrainian
Well,
factions.
I actually pulled up that clip, and I don't know. This is I don't know how long was the clip, because the one I've got is 4 minutes and change.
Yeah, it should be about four.
Okay, so let's
let's
go to the clip here, and then I'll get Josh's take on the backside.
What do you think?
I think we're in play.
Is this it?
The Klitschko piece is obviously the complicated electron here, especially the announcement of him as deputy prime minister. And you've seen some of my notes on the troubles in the marriage right now, so we're trying to get a read really fast on where he is on this stuff. But I think your argument to him, which you'll need to make, I think that's the next phone call we want to set up, is exactly the one you made to Yachts. And I'm glad you sort of put him on the spot on where he fits in this scenario. And I'm very glad he said what he said in response.
Good. So I don't think Klitsch should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you think, what, in terms of him not going into the government, just let him sort of stay out and do his political homework and stuff. I'm just thinking in terms of sort of the process moving ahead, we want to keep the moderate Democrats together. The problem is going to be Tony Book and his guys. And, I'm sure that's part of what Yanukovych is calculating on all of this.
I think Yachts is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, what he needs is Klitsch and Tony Book on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week, I just think Klitsch going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Okay, good. Well, do you want us to try to set up a call with him as the next step?
My understanding from that call, but you tell me, was that the big three were going into their own meeting, and that Yachts was going to offer in that context a three-way, the 3+1 conversation or 3+2 with you. Is that not how you understood it?
No, I mean, that's what he proposed, but I think just knowing the dynamic that's been with them where Klitschko has been the top dog, he's going to take a while to show up for whatever meeting they've got. He's probably talking to his guys at this point, so I think you reaching out directly to him helps with the personality management among the three, and it gives you also a chance to move fast on all this stuff and put us behind it before they all sit down and he explains why he doesn't like it.
Okay, good. I'm happy. Why don't you reach out to him and see if he wants to talk before or after?
Okay, will do. Thanks.
Okay, I've now written, one more wrinkle for you, Jeff.
Yeah.
Can't remember if I told you this or if I only told Washington this, that when I talked to Jeff Feltman this morning, he had a new name for the UN guy, Robert Seri. Did I write you that this morning?
Yeah, okay. I saw that.
he's now gotten both Seri and Ban Ki-moon to agree that Seri could come in Monday or Tuesday.
Okay.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it. And, fuck the EU.
No, exactly. And I think we've got to do something to make it stick together, because you can be pretty sure that if it does start to gain altitude, the Russians will be working behind to try to torpedo it. And again, the fact that this is out there right now, I'm still trying to figure out in my mind why Yanukovych did that. But in the meantime, there's a Party of Regions faction meeting going on right now, and I'm sure there's a lively argument going on in that group at this point. But anyway, we could land jelly side up on this one if we move fast. So let me work on Klitschko, and if you can just keep, I think we want to try to get somebody with an international personality to come out here and help to midwife this thing. And then the other issue is some kind of outreach to Yanukovych, but we probably regroup on that tomorrow as we see how things start to fall into place.
So on that piece, Jeff, when I wrote the note, Sullivan's come back to me, VFR, saying you need Biden, and I said probably tomorrow for an attaboy and to get the deets to stick. So
okay.
Biden's willing.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thanks.
Okay, so political mumbo jumbo. Josh, interpret for the group there.
Well, I think that probably the two most important pieces in the flows presented there are the mention of two names. We've got Yatsenyuk, who's the head of the Fatherland Party, who Victoria Nuland affectionately refers to as Yats throughout the conversation. And also discussed was Ole Tianibok.
That's okay. You should just have Robert on to pronounce these names for us.
Seriously, though, so Yats is the head of the Fatherland Party, one of these neo-Nazi organizations, who the State Department, it seems, is advocating take political control of the Ukraine, at least the Kiev faction of the Ukraine, and I think that it's important that we start to make these distinctions as civil war is clearly shaping up within the country. And she advocates that Tianibok take more of a subordinate role to the Fatherland Party, but of course Tianibok also is the leader of Svoboda, the other neo-Nazi faction. So at this point in time, it seems that the State Department is advocating that two neo-Nazi groups essentially join forces to.
Wow, that'll be great. And then we can go over there and destabilize them in a couple of years, and that'll be fun too. We'll make some money.
Well, and it really is kind of scary in the sense that, we've talked on this program and on Journalistic Revolution a number of times whether or not that we're shaping up for a new Cold War, or whether or not we're already in the midst of a new Cold War.
I would agree 100%, and it's a lot softer than it used to be because the information is more readily available to the public. There's not as much. Right. Yeah, that is a very good point, and that's one of the things that I brought up before you came on is that I know that LeBron James scored 61 points last night, but I mean we could actually talk about something that could bring on a really widened conflict, and especially when whenever you're talking about Russia in general, those guys typically don't play games. I mean they'll bluff and they'll strong arm a little bit, but when it's time to play ball, they do not back down. Unlike
I mean, they didn't back down in Georgia in 2008 when the State Department and the deep political actors of NATO
in
tried
Georgia,
to do the
and then they rolled in nukes and said, "Okay, bring it on."
Yep, and that was affectionately referred to as the 5-day war or something like that, right? And we're seeing the same kind of military mobilization, unless, of course, you truly believe these are the largest drills in recent Russian military history, in which case I want to know what you're smoking, because I need that number. But, we have now people uploading videos of supply lines, of tanks, of Russian MiG helicopters flying into the Ukraine. Like this is shaping up to be
one of the questions
conflict.
that I posed in the actual podcast was: is this going to shape up to be a real regional conflict, or are we just looking at some political posturing. And I don't really know what to make of it, other than the fact that with my limited sight on the information that I have at hand, it doesn't look good for I would say a soft guerrilla type civil war with skirmishes and squabbles every now and again. Nothing like we saw in Egypt, nothing like we saw or like we're still seeing in Syria, but that's out of the public's mind, Josh. That was 7 seconds ago. That's out of their mind. So I think that, in my personal opinion, and maybe this is a hopeful delusion, I guess, would be that this will be more of a political posturing effort, with Putin coming out saying that he's not going to use force, but will reserve the right to use force. So once again, I really do, not that I like glorify or fantasize about the Russians, but I really wish that American foreign policy could take some cues from the way that Putin handles himself in certain situations, unlike Obama, where it's like, here's a red line. Well, we're going to draw another one. No, we're going to draw another, and now we're going to bomb you. We don't got any intel, but we're going to bomb you because we got to do it. Go America. Show them the mug, Josh. Show them the mug. There you go.
I don't know. Go America. But I mean, I'm really not sure if I take sides with Oceania or East Asia, or even care what the posturing of either nation is.
Because if it's their squabble, let them deal with it. And as I've said, prefacing this entire show, this land's been in dispute since I think it was 1850, or I'm gonna have to check my notes. And it's changed hands 13 times from 1917 to 1942. So, I mean, you're looking at an area in a region it's kind of like, I don't want to offend anybody, but I really don't give a shit. It's kind of like the Israelis and the Palestinians. I mean, you're looking at the same squabble for, Israel and Palestine. You're looking at the same squabble for hundreds of years. It's never going to change. It's not.
Yeah, I mean, I'd hardly call it offensive to discuss what is a clearly a long-standing conflict, and at the moment, at the very least, and a few apartheid states. So it's a very sad situation. But what I really think is interesting about all this, and Jake, I want to know if what you think about this particular take on it, is this Washington going for broke, in the sense that they tried to kind of foment this rebellion in the heat of the night in Syria, during which there was Russian mobilization. Russia essentially called Washington's bluff, and had to back out then. We're doing this now again in the Ukraine, to which, again, military mobilization is being used as a deterrence on the behalf of the Russians. And we are yet to see really whether or not Washington will respond in force, which obviously would be tremendously foolish. But we're seeing this now 2 times in the past 6 months, which is unprecedented. This is Washington trying to pick a fight deliberately on 2 fronts in 2 different regions with one specific country. Right. So is this really, Washington seeing that all the chips are down, that the digital game, the digital Ponzi scheme of Wall Street can no longer sustain itself, or at least the cement slathered on the dam is starting to leak, and it's time to
it's a really good
time
question,
to rally
because
the troops
that's
again?
typically what happens when you have economic uncertainty, to say the least, is that the answer is always to trot people off to war, to create a boogeyman, but that's just human culture. I mean, human culture says that when you have strife in the village, create an outside enemy that people can rally around. Absolutely. Now, is that what's going on here? I think it's that people that are actually in Washington trying to run foreign policy have never studied history or economics and have no freaking clue what they're doing. I mean, that conversation right there, that sounded like they were trying to organize like a company softball game. No, you're playing with millions of people's lives, and you're possibly risking going to war. You're an idiot. You're a moron. This is not your little fancy, oh, I get to make phone calls and we'll see if we can't put a different person into power that's more friendly for our country. Get over it. I think it's going to come to a head eventually with the demilitarization of the United States. I really do think that it's us taking a backseat to somebody else. And I think that it might be the death throes of the dying republic, or the dying, whatever you want to call it, the dying empire, whatever you want to categorize us. I really do think that as we start demilitarizing, as we start losing funding, I think that people are realizing now that we are Rome, and fiddling as Rome burns is not going to do us any good, that we have to stabilize. And these people trying to stir up rebellions are just trying to stir up profits or to try to stir up distractions. And that's my take on it. But to fail twice, like you said, with something that was so successful in the past, but now with technology they can't do this kind of stuff anymore, that just really frustrates me. Just listening to that phone call between these two people, it's like it's at a deeper level to me. That's very disturbing that people try to play games like that, literally like you're trying to organize a company softball outing, and you're really devastating people's lives, possibly getting their energy cut off from Russia. Russia's talking about, hey, if you throw sanctions on us, we're just going to cut off energy supply there. And the American people will probably be like, screw them, they're Ukrainian, we don't care. Like, we don't even know where that is. Like,
well, I mean, and obviously the tremendous fact that's being ignored here is, that natural gas does not just supply the Ukraine. It supplies
like 35%
of Western Europe
Germany,
as well,
and like 25% of Poland. It's a big deal. And Russia understands that, and that's what I think is so stupid about American foreign policy in some instances. It's like, do you guys think that these people over there don't have computers or something, or that they don't have really smart people trying to engineer other stratagems and strategies for them? Do you think that they're all stupid? It's like, oh, okay, you want to play games in our backyard? All right, well, we'll just shut off their energy. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. This isn't, and that's such an important point, because it's not 1960 anymore, right? Like, you can't just screw around with this stuff for United Fruit and topple over some banana
and then
republic.
Try to get him to take over the United States.
Just because you feel like it on a whim, right?
The world champion. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's like exactly. But I mean, there's literally an information overload on this stuff within moments of it happening these days. So even if the corporate media refuses to cover this kind of stuff, there will be a sizable percentage of not just global citizens, but American citizens specifically, that know about this stuff, that know that the empire is on the move again, and that it's time to make your voice heard on the matter. And obviously, in terms of Syria, the answer was a resounding no. Whether or not these people are so boisterous as to forego the opinions of the American public and do what they want, I think that they've done it plenty of times in the past and will continue to do it in the future. But we're seeing such a universal opposition to extended American conflict now, even more so than we saw in the early to mid 70s as we were pulling out of Indochina. So this it really is an unprecedented shift in the opinions of the American
for the people that care, and for the people that don't care and that just say, well, it doesn't really matter to me. They just drift off into la la land. But those are the people that are never going to call their congressman, that are never going to try to do anything political anyway. So just forget them, people. Just forget them. And if you're one of those people that wants to get politically active, if you want to be involved in reality, I mean, how do you watch television when you're sitting there looking at burned buildings, like you said, basically a country that's about to go to civil war, helicopters flying all over the place? How does that not interest you? How does somebody putting a ball through a hoop interest you more than this? That's what I still can't get. I guess because, once again, it always goes back to the American psyche, whatever is easiest. Because it's hard to learn where the Ukraine's geolocated, and it's hard to read the history of Crimea and whatever. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and there are so many more broader geopolitical implications to what's going on in the Ukraine right now. It's a situation that's literally developing day by day, if not hour by hour. You know, like
I
you
was
have to stay on
absolutely
top of this
overwhelmed
stuff
when I was trying to do research for the show today, and I probably spent 3 hours just researching news articles, trying to sift through, well, this article says this, and this article says this, which is really the truer picture here. And typically it's going to be, you know, somewhere in between the different shades of gray, I guess is what you're going to get. But you're right. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of work. But my God, why wouldn't you want to have a conversation like this rather than, I guess that's what makes me different, is that I would rather have a conversation like this than have a conversation about, you know, who the Braves are going to sign in the next couple of weeks. But then again, I can't knock you because you're a Tigers fan, so you probably actually do take a little bit of that to heart. But anyway, okay. Well, here, let me read this this brief clip of this article that I pulled up, which I thought was interesting. And this was from the 23rd of February, so take it for what it's worth. And it's from the BBC. So, but I just want to hear people. I want to hear people understand how mainstream press works in other nations, and not just ours. And what they're talking about, and why you need to do your own research, and most importantly, just do some quick. I mean, I spent probably 45 minutes to an hour researching the history of this area. When I saw the history of the area, I understood what the conflict was about. I understood why Russia would want this support. I understood why Russia was getting pissed off at America for going over to Syria. That's another port that they have. So it just seems like that everywhere the West is trying to destabilize a Soviet port here, taking away some leverage there, it's just or encircling them, whatever you want to call it. But they're definitely poking the bear here, and that's a bear that I don't want to poke. But here's the CNN article. I just want to read this to you. The woman that got ousted, I guess, was the former president, was told by MPs that they had until Tuesday to form a newly united government. Remember, this is back a couple of weeks ago. Later in a TV address, Mr. Tanovsky, help me out with that, the guy that's the leader of the whatever, starts. No, Chernovich suggested that Ukraine would reopen talks with the EU with closer links. And it says, Mr. Yanukovych's rejection of the EU trade pact triggered the protests that toppled him. That's exactly what, and that's where I wanted to stop because I wanted to get your take on it. His rejection of the trade pact was not what triggered these protests. Not in the least.
Well, I think that whether or not that is the case, which obviously I disagree with, it's almost immaterial to the more important fact. And that's, would any kind of protest under any means have taken place without significant financial assistance
I would 100%
and mobilization
agree, but this just shows
from the West?
From a political perspective and also from a reader's perspective, how you would get skewed and just always believing that the EU are the good guys, or always believing that the UN are the good guys. So now we have shifted the American psyche and the foreign psyche to... Well, hey, America's the good guys. It's like, no. The EU's good. America's good. You know, even though we run child slave rings and do child abductions all over the planet, and we were caught doing it in congressional testimony, that doesn't really, listen, that doesn't matter. I mean, come on.
Well, I think the largest problem here is that no matter where you are in the Western world, because we have a universal system of Prussian education and a universal system of propaganda, it's used differently by different states. But one thing all of them don't teach you is to question declarative sentences. So exactly. So in an article, or any article from the BBC, the New York Times, or Orton Tucky News,
you know, in Pennsylvania know what they're talking about. All right,
any of them. Exactly. You know, if a declarative sentence is made and it doesn't have context and it doesn't have supporting arguments with which you can read and make up your own mind about the validity of said declarative statement, this should be ingrained in the human psyche at this point in human history. Humans should know that other humans try to deceive them, and that you need to think about what is being said on a page or on a screen
Obama wants to give
before
me free healthcare,
you make up your own mind about it.
What a joke.
Got my Obama
very
phone.
very pertinent statement to make
Obama,
right there. And I think that is something that everybody can take away from this podcast. We will give you glimmers and gems of pure logic, reason, and decision-making on this show every once in a while, everybody. This would be one that you would want to share with your friends. Not my psycho-babbling through the history of this this stricken area, but possibly you would want to let everybody understand what Josh is talking about with a declarative statement. And it was kind of interesting that subconsciously, I guess I caught that. Because when I was reading the article, I said, wait a minute, what the hell? Like, that's not what this was about. And it's not even, like you said, it's not even the fact that that's not what it was about should be important. What should be important is it just makes a declarative statement and then moves on. And says in his address, he said the dialogue with Russia that he can expect the Ukraine's the Europeans' choice, according to the translation remarks carried by the Associated Foreign Press News Agency. So there.
Yeah, but it's one thing to have a declarative statement that disagrees with a pre-existing
Jesus
ideology.
Was a mushroom.
Right? Like, it doesn't. I don't think every Christian who reads the phrase. Exactly, or there is no God. I don't think Christians look at that and take it, without questioning, because there's a part of their psyche that already says, wait, I've learned otherwise. I think so. I'm not going to believe that, right? And this goes for anything. So but we need to get back in the habit as a species of questioning all declarative sentences, from there is no God to there is a God and you have to give 10% of your savings to him. And by the way, here's his visage. This is a cult of human sacrifice. We didn't tell you that part when he came in the door, but come to heaven with us.
Shed for you.
Right?
This is the blood of Christ shed for you.
These are all statements that deserve questioning.
I don't mean to get on a Christian rant or anything like that, because values that Christianity teaches are very good. Some of the things that the 18th century Christianity that is basically taught around some of these Southern Baptist churches that I'm around is very, 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 very different.
Well, it's not called the greatest story ever told for no reason. I think that everyone should certainly read it. Read it in the purest context possible. If you're going to read a tainted one, at the very least, make it like the New International Version or something translated directly from Aramaic.
I can't read the New Contemporary one that tells me I can wear jeans and go bang on drums and then I'll be saved and go to heaven, as long as I give the mega church 10% of my savings.
I think the best one to read really is the Book of Mormon.
There we go. Okay, so that was all satirical rant for the last 2 minutes. So if we lost everybody on the podcast, we are still going to talk about the Ukraine. But I would also like to touch on what you and we got a few minutes here. What we got, like 7 minutes left? Good. All right. So final thoughts on the Ukraine, man. Let's wrap this up, and then we can go into some other stuff really quickly before we got to get out of here.
I think it's a really sad situation, and it's a situation that isn't being reported accurately in any sides of the American mainstream media, right? It's funny, my dad came bursting in the room earlier saying, I had Bill O'Reilly on in the background, and he had Dennis Kucinich on, and Dennis Kucinich actually said, well, maybe we shouldn't be funding and founding neo-Nazi groups to overthrow governments and then complain about the reaction from Russia. And of course that was responded to with a flippant argument from America's favorite newsman. Yeah, the spin stopped right there, and then Bill had to give it another push. But I do think that, it's encouraging that on this particular subject, some of this dialogue is even entering mainstream media, if only to be discredited and dismissed. So the fact that people are becoming familiar with these kind of talking points is encouraging, in the sense that if you are someone who's listened to this kind of information, or you go out and you read articles, whether they're from the BBC or they're from Global Research, or they talk about trade deal oustings or neo-Nazis or any of these competing ideas or factions within the discussion about the Ukraine, you can now at least have them in a public forum. People won't stare at you with doe eyes, of course, unless they ask, what is the Ukraine, which I think
a better question would ask them would be, where is it?
With.
Put it on the map.
That's what I'm saying. I don't even think they'd ask.
Yeah, exactly. Well, anyway, not to bash the sheeple, but I mean, it is. Huh?
What's the Ukraine?
Hey man, I heard of U-Haul. I ain't heard of Ukraine before. And so that was my cheesy Southern joke for the night. But I would agree with a lot of what you said, in the fact that it's a very sad situation. It's very disgusting to me. It's like and it should be disgusting to everybody that lives in this country. And once again, I'm not a big nationalist, but I do share a border with all of you people that are listening to this fine broadcast, and I don't like my tax dollars or my name being spread all over the world as somebody that goes and foments rebellions full of neo-Nazis to overthrow governments so that we can come in and bang out a trade deal. I mean, come on, give me a break. And it's not like this is not a tactic that the United States have never done before, and oh my God, we got caught this one time. No, we've been doing this since like the 40s with the Ayatollah. And no, probably, yeah. I would, yeah. I left it open for. I mean, I'm just talking about recent history, I guess. But I mean, it should be very disturbing to everyone.
This is, yeah, absolutely. This is, I think, America coming face to face with the cognitive dissonance that it has held for a very long time. In that, America is now having to look at itself and say, we are a country that foments rebellions, that goes and screws over its friends and its enemies, that sets up its friends to become its enemies later on, that uses untold human sacrifice and bloodshed for control of resources and drugs to poison their own people. Right? This is the country that America is and has been for a very long time. And my greatest fear is that this will once again be compartmentalized to a Biden administration.
So Obama will have Syria and the Ukraine, right? And then whoever the next person that Wall Street decides they want to fund comes in, it'll be like, well, that was Obama's stuff, and look at and then it just really leaves a big gap to say, and I think this is where you're kind of going. Let's just leave say, oh, look at what he did as a president. He did X, Y, and Z, and we got this new guy in here now. It just, guys, it's up to you. It's up to you, the individual. It's not up to somebody. Quit electing people. How about that? How about quit paying taxes? Hey, there's some novel concepts to you. Quit voting. Why do you vote for these people? Why do you care? And I think that and if you think that you're going to go in and change the political system of the United States, and you're going to go in there and I'm going to go in and I'm going to be the champion of the Constitution. Good luck, son. Good luck against those blue blood Republicans and the Democratic Party, because they got tons of money and they got lots of power. And that's why I say the only way that we're going to reverse this stuff is to you can't elect somebody that's going to reverse the United States. It's just impossible. So you have to withdraw. You have to withdraw consent. You have to withdraw monetarily, any way that you can from any kind of big franchise, any kind of big government spending. Do whatever you can, and just understand that you're going to face repercussions no matter what. And let's just hope that they can't go after your pocketbook. So just make it just make it nice and easy for them. All right, so Josh, we got about a minute or two left, and we're probably going to go into some overtime here. Once again, everybody, if you want to see this broken up video, hopefully it won't be too bad this time, because I've actually lowered the frame rate. Not to get into a bunch of nerd speak, but lowered the frame rate, so hopefully we'll have a decent production this time, and it'll actually look like I'm speaking and then Josh is speaking instead of us speaking over each other. So, once again, I apologize, everybody, but I'm trying to do the best I can and trying to produce better content on this strict budget, and I hate it when that girl talks to me.
60
anyway,
seconds.
Can you hear that, Josh? Okay, so everybody's going to be able to hear that. So everybody gets to hear what
Yes,
I hear.
can.
You get to hear somebody yelling at me just to wrap up my own show. What a joke. All right, so anyway, Josh, let's talk about the One Step Beyond. We're going to try to get that filmed this weekend. Is that I know you wanted to try to do it earlier, but we might be able to bang it out Friday, just depending on Little One, because I do have a floating variable in the situation. So let's talk about the One Step Beyond, what our philosophy is, and how we're going to produce this thing, and the reason that we're producing it. So a lot to take in right there, so let's go.
Yeah, I call it an as quick as possible type thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's obviously you're the moving variable in
Yeah,
that
see,
scenario.
she cut you off. Get
but
10 seconds.
She's British, so it makes it
I
okay.
I love it. She's really oh man, grinding my gears, man. But One Step Beyond, I guess, is going to be kind of a lengthy discussion, documentary style discussion between the two of us. You know, maybe down the road we'll bring in other people, but about specific topics, kind of from an angle that might not have been covered at length or at all. So, for example, our first episode will be on the Anglo-American establishment, of which there is, a litany of research about in print, in podcast form, in video form. But we're really going to be kind of talking about not only the history of the Anglo-American Empire itself, but the mechanisms by which they sustain their control. And I think that's an important discussion to have in an uninterrupted format. I think that there's a lot of places where you could get all this information, but it would take a lot of clicking and a lot of reading, and we're looking to kind of be tutors, I guess. Is that a good word for
absolutely.
it? Tutors
and a good way to kind of look at it is
knowledge?
I would be considered a moderate or a novice, where somebody like yourself that has spent more time researching and have read more of the books from the global comptrollers and other people from the Anglo-American establishment, or have talked about it or have been a part of it. I think that will give us a really good dichotomy of two different perspectives. Somebody that's coming into the information. Let's see, I've been doing research on and off for the past 5.5 years. So I'm 5.5 years in. Obviously, haven't put in the time and effort that you have. But it'll give people a good jumping off point, as well as finding out where they are in this in this area of information, and then finding out where they want to go. And like you and I talked about before, there's a bunch of different rabbit holes to go down, and each one of them leads to a different place. Which is, if you're doing research, it's always fun to find out where the end of the rainbow is. But at the end of the day, you have to pick your battles and find out what interests you, and that's why we're going to cover a whole litany of different topics and cover them in a format that's very succinct. And I think that I'm actually going to wear a shirt with a tie on it, and Josh might be actually dressing up too. So we're going to try to look fancy for you people, and we're going to videotape it on two ends. And hopefully we won't have any lag, and we'll be able to produce some good content, because that's really what it's all about. If we can produce really good content, then you will have no qualms sharing it with somebody else, because it'll look good and it'll be an accurate and cogent representation of the information. So hopefully, we're going to do our best for you. If you can do our best for us and spread the message, then we would really appreciate it. Any last thoughts, Josh, before we sign off tonight?
No, that sums it up pretty well. You can find, I guess, all of my work at journalisticrevolution.com. I'm on the air there. I guess Sunday night is the only night that you can consistently find me from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Over at libertymovementradio.com. But journalisticrevolution.com is where I kind of live and breathe. That's where I put out more of my personal work and the stuff that just has my rubber seal of approval on it, because every time, as you do live radio and collaborations with other people, there are, a smorgasbord of different opinions that get thrown around, and some ideologies espoused to that might not necessarily be my own. So if you want my take on
and
it,
as always, you guys can find me at wearenotcattle.net. Like my YouTube channel, like my Facebook page. Follow me on Twitter if you want. And once we get this stuff out, it is going to be pushed out on both of our sites. And moving forward in the future, I think we're in the works of talking about being in, Josh is moving towards the journalistic revolution, being a news aggregator, and I will probably be joining their team, so they will carry my research, my work, my take on the world, whatever you want to call it. They will be keeping it there, and you can find me through that link as well. So hopefully we'll be able to do some good cross-branding and cross-platforms, because I think that a lot of people that share interest in your show would share an interest in mine, and vice versa. So catch them. They actually run a show Wednesday, Sunday, and Friday from 11.
Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday
anyway,
from
time
11
to end the
p.m.
show,
to
everybody.
1 a.m.
When you're starting to butcher plugs, it is time to end the show. So thank you, everybody, for listening. Once again, as always, get a friend, get informed, and get involved. And let's try to see if we can keep America out of these foreign entanglements by fomenting rebellions full of neo-Nazis. Doesn't that sound like fun? Take care, everybody.
Thank you for using Blog Talk Radio. Goodbye.
How's that freedom? There's freedom everywhere.
How's that freedom?